Okay, everybody, I think we will get started. So, I would like to welcome everybody to the New South Wales Family Day Care Association webinar. This session is on enrolment and orientation in family daycare, and this is part of the PD in Your Pocket series. So, we would like to thank New South Wales Family Day Care Association and the New South Wales Government for putting this evening on. So, thank you so much for joining us. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Chris Hall and I'm going to be your facilitator for this evening. If you have any questions, if you'd like to pop them in the chat box as we go along, Ethan will be able to pass those on to me and hopefully we will get to as many questions as we possibly can at the end of the session. So let's get started. So before we begin, we would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land that we meet upon. For me personally, tonight I'm coming to you from Dharawal country and I would like to pay my respects to the Aboriginal elders past, present and future, and to all Aboriginal people tonight, I would like to say welcome. So thank you for joining. Okay, so first, before we get started, I just wanted to double check about the enrolment and orientation booklet that you would have received earlier or prior to this session. We have sent you a link specifically to prepare for this week, and hopefully you've had a chance to have a look at the book. But if you haven't received it, you can actually find a link on the screen. And if you are watching this presentation and you haven't received it, please click on the link and you'll be able to receive the information that we're talking about. If you are listening to it as a podcast, the link is www.nswfdc.org.au/PD in your pocket. The New South Wales Regulatory Authority is funding tonight's session, so we would just like to thank them for that. This is the final one that is going to be funded for the year. However, I do believe that there is one more in November from New South Wales Family Day Care, so hopefully you can join us for that. Okay, so having a look at some of the information that we have gathered from you, what did we learn from you? So what we have asked, what we have asked is, how important do you see the enrolment and orientation process in family daycare? So none of you said that it wasn't important, so that's good. But that probably equates to about 3 out of 800 people that have been surveyed. 7% said it's kind of important and 93% said very important. So that's really refreshing to hear, because enrolment and orientation really is important and it is the cornerstone of starting a relationship with a new family in your service. So let's have a look at some more statistics. So we asked the question, how many play visits or orientation visits have you conducted prior to children starting in care with you? And the statistics are 2% of us don't do them at all, and that's where the light blue slice is in the middle. 33% of you actually said that you have approximately 1 visit. 39% have approximately 2 visits with the family prior to starting. 14% have 3 visits, and 12% of you actually have 4 or more play visits or orientation sessions. So the majority of you would have 2 to 3 play visits each session before the child starts in care. So this is fantastic. Then we actually asked, do you have an educator's handbook? And is this something that you give out to families prior to them enrolling? Thankfully, 64% of you said yes, and 36% of you said no. We will be talking about this as we go further through this session tonight. And hopefully we can change the minds of the 36% that don't. And hopefully we can actually showcase that it really is important to put your best foot forward when you're trying to sell your service to a brand new family and establish a great relationship with them prior to starting, and giving them all of the information that they will need for their child to start in care. Okay, then we asked, who does the bulk of the formal enrolment process? Who does that? And 27% of you said that the service takes care of this. And interestingly enough, 73% of the educators actually do this themselves. So this is not something that we did expect in terms of numbers. We actually thought that the service or the coordination unit would be doing more for you. So we might unpack this as we go along, and hopefully we'll get some of those answers as to why. Okay, then we ask, do you use an enrolment checklist? So when the families come in, have you got a checklist handy that you can actually prompt yourself, with some topics to actually talk about? And thankfully, 75% of you said yes, 25% no. So hopefully, again, we can change some of those statistics by the end of this, and we can showcase how important it is to be really organised and ready to go for an enrolment when a new family comes into care. So what we're going to do is have a look at what we are covering tonight. So firstly, we're going to have a look at what is enrolment and what is orientation, and hopefully we can decipher between the two. We're going to look at why enrolment and orientation are so important, and what do you think about this? And hopefully we'll get to some questions or some comments that you have at the end about what is effective for you as an educator. We're going to have a look at why enrolment and orientation sessions are important for families and what do the families get out of it, and equally why enrolment and orientation are important for children as well. We are going to look at why enrolment and orientation is so important for us as educators. We're going to unpack a little bit about the regs and the national quality standards and what do they require from us as an educator. We're going to have a look at some ways that we can do the enrolment well. And hopefully from tonight's session, if you haven't already got some of these things implemented, then this might give you, just some tips on how to actually improve your service. And we can record this as a bit of critical reflection, and we will take some moments throughout this session to critically reflect along the way. So ways that we can do orientation well as well and enrolment. We're going to look at evaluating our processes. We're going to watch a video that hopefully will give you some other ideas, and it's going to be talking with one of our family daycare services and hopefully get some more insight into this process. And then hopefully we'll get time for questions. So let's have a look at what is enrolment and what is orientation. What is enrolment? An enrolment occurs when the provider has an arrangement with an individual or organisation to provide education and care to a child. And this has come straight from a CEQA. So really important. But then what is orientation? So orientation is the process to support the child's transition to the service, whereby families spend time at the service with the child, maybe a few times before leaving the child on their own. And the time required for orientation and settling in will vary for each child and each family. And I would also jump in and say each service, each educator is going to provide a different service for orientation. But I think we can establish that it is super important for children and families to get to know you, to build up that level of trust, and to start building a relationship with the family. So then we're going to move on to why is enrolment and orientation so important? For one key reason, I'm sure you would all agree that it really is the beginning of the new relationship that you're about to start with a child and with that child's family, and that the child and the family are going to start with you. So there's lots of things that happen within that process. It also sets the stage for the relationship that you will build. And hopefully, if you do it well and you get the relationship off to a good start, then it's going to be long lasting. And that's what we're aiming for. So enrolment and orientation really are the cornerstone for the beginning of the relationship that you're going to build with the family. And I think we can see from this photo how important it is when we bring it back to what's best for the child, what's best for the family, and what's best for the dynamics of your group. Hopefully, it's a perfect match. So why is enrolment and orientation so important for families? When you consider orientation really is the first step that a parent or family will actually take to get to know you and get to know your service. And so it's really important because there really are three parties involved in this process. We have the child, we have the family, and we also have the educator and your own family. So as a family daycare educator, we need to make sure that it is a goodness of fit for everybody. So I love this picture. It's a great way to actually set the tone for when a family steps into your door. Hopefully, if you don't have something that welcomes families in, but really have a think about tonight about what the family will see when they first enter your home for the first time and your service, and really have a look at the aesthetics of that and just ensure that you are providing a welcoming space. So it really is the first welcome that parents will see. But prior to this, it may even start with the phone call. So answering the phone in a professional manner, being really considerate, being really flexible, and making sure that if you miss the call, that you do actually contact the family back as soon as possible. So, what is a welcome? The dictionary tells us that a welcome is to greet hospitably and with courtesy, and to make sure that everybody feels safe and secure. It is the time when you make the other person, and in this case, other people or children and family, we want to make them feel at ease and feel comfortable with you as the educator for their child. This may be the very first time that they've ever met an educator, particularly in family daycare. So we really want to put our best foot forward. The least that we can do is be welcoming and have a beautiful, clean space ready for the family to come into. Okay, so looking at this beautiful picture here, I want you to just take a moment just to think about if you were the family or if you were the educator, having a look at the child, because they are actually the centre of why we're meeting and have enrolments and orientation. So we really want to have a look at this picture and just have a think about what it would feel like to be a parent leaving your child for the very first time. Maybe you have done this already, or maybe you haven't, but I really want you to put yourself into the shoes of the family coming into your home or to your space for the very first time. What are they thinking? What are they feeling? What are they smelling? What are they viewing? There's lots of different ways that we can actually welcome families into our home. So this is where the feelings of security come from, and children, to most parents, are their most treasured possession. So therefore, they need to feel secure and care for their child. So your first impression of your personality, of you as an educator, your philosophy and what you value is really important when you first meet the family for the very first time. Okay, so let's have a look at this picture as well. Another fantastic picture about the educator, the parent, and the child. Obviously, families, come in many different shapes and sizes, but we really want to have a look and we want to invite as many family members into your service as possible without being disruptive to obviously the rest of your routine, but ensuring that all family members are part of the decision-making process. And this is where the trust is first built. So families need to be able to trust you as their child's educator. So everything that you say and do in your enrolment interview is going to play into the hands of how comfortable and safe and secure that the family feel with you being their child's educator. It's also where families first realise that we value their role as parents and as the child's first educator. And I think it's really important that when you do have a service handbooklet, that you actually put those words in there, that we do value the parent's opinion or the family's opinion, and we do really value that you are your child's first educator. It is also where we realise that parenting won't be judged, and also when the parents realise that you won't ignore their knowledge of their child, but you will learn from it and use it to actually, enhance their child's learning. Another beautiful picture. So enrolment and orientation is also important to families because it's where we give them the information and also those feelings of security that will allow them to reassure that their child is going to be with a great educator and that they are going to have fun in your family daycare service. So again, really think about your interactions. Are you busy? Are you organised? Are you rushing around? And does the family feel like, maybe you're too busy to sit down and invest that time with them? So really think about what your service looks like, how prepared you are when the family arrives, and also consider the timing as well. So many families want to come and see how you interact with other children, and that's okay, but it might be a series of meetings. So it might be a very quick meeting while you've got other children in care because the other children are first and foremost your priority. But they might be wanting to look at your interactions, or then you might set up another meeting where it's just the family and their child. But at the heart of it, it would be great for the child to be present at pretty much most of those meetings so that you can see how the child interacts with you. You can have a look at their development and just ensure that the whole family is a goodness of fit to the dynamics of your service. Okay, why is enrolment and orientation so important for children, which is the reason that we're all here tonight? Orientation is important for children because it is often the first time that they come to your home, and it's the first time that they're going to meet you. And hopefully from this meeting, then you will establish a relationship with them. So, thinking to your own family, if you've ever enrolled them into any formal childcare before, how are you made to feel? Or if you don't have children, how would you want to be treated? And how would you want your child to be treated? So I would really suggest getting down on the child's level, engaging with them. Obviously respecting their sense of agency. So if they don't want to, be cuddled or picked up, that's okay. But, having some age appropriate activities ready for them at the orientation would be fantastic as well. It just shows to the family that their child matters and that you have considered all of your options, and you're very organised and you really want this enrolment to go ahead. Start of an important relationship. So I think we have established that obviously enrolment and orientation is the basis of where this relationship is going to go. Hopefully it will be long lasting, but as we all know, sometimes that doesn't always work out. But we want to make sure that we put everything into forming these relationships, the relationships with the children, and obviously the relationships with the family, and also for the families to build a relationship with you and your family as well, because that's what the beauty of family daycare is all about. So it is the important step of a formative relationship. And do you remember your first teacher? Do you remember your first educator? How did they make you feel? What things do you remember about them? So think back to that first time and put yourself in the shoes of the families or even for the children. For a lot of us, that is a memory that remains in our minds for a lifetime, or it may be as you got a bit older, a really important teacher that you had at school, somebody that made you feel special. This is what we want to create for the children within our service. Your relationship with them is going to be just as important to both the family and obviously the child, and it needs to start off with that level of importance that it really deserves. So to grow and learn, children must feel safe. So we want to create a beautiful space where children come to our service every day and know that they're going to feel safe, they're going to feel trusted, they're going to feel loved, they're going to feel like they can be themselves, and they can feel like that the learning environment is meant for them. So we know that children cannot learn unless they feel safe, and for them to learn from you, they have to feel safe. So you need to set up that safety from the very first minute that you meet them. And I would also add to this that this is where the handbooklet comes in very handy, because you can put lots of things in there that you might not get the opportunity to say to families when they first come and meet with you. Sometimes an enrolment interview will go for a very long time. You might have a family that stays for 1 to 2 hours, but equally you might have a family that just pops in for about 10 or 15 minutes. The family may be nervous. The family may not know what questions to ask. So I think if you have, going back to the survey that we did at the beginning, and having the enrolment checklist, because it's really easy to forget some of these things, or it's easy to go off onto different tangents. But I think if we have something concrete that can remind us of the reasons why we want to be an educator and how we want to showcase our service, I think a handbooklet and having something to be able to hand to families would be a really good idea. Children pick up on cues. Absolutely. So as you know, as an educator, how much information children pick up or learn from you or learn from other children. They also pick up cues about how their parents greet you. So from how other children act around you, from what you have in your family daycare home for them to explore. And they also pick up on cues from the very first moment, with all of that information that we have just established that we're going to give to families. So it's really important that the children can actually see that they are valued, but also that their family is valued. And if it's a nice, calm, beautiful, organised environment from the very first moment, hopefully that will ensure that the child feels safe as well. Why is enrolment and orientation important for us as educators? And it is important to consider us in part of this process as well. So there is another person involved in the enrolment and orientation, and that's us as educators. And these processes are also important for us for many different reasons. And this is true that if this is the very first child that you've enrolled in your family daycare service, or if this child is the 100th, every child is important. Every child should be valued. Every family should feel the same. And we really need to showcase how important our role is and let families know that we actually love what we do. That is really important to establish as well. Enrolment and orientation is also important because it allows us to showcase our family daycare service. And, there are many different things that you may not get to capture in the very small time that you meet with a family. But I think, again, coming back to being organised, having things prepared, having paperwork, it might even have a logo on there. It just looks really professional, because we do need to remember that in this ever-changing world of early childhood education and care, that families have many choices, and it's really important that we leave a lasting impression. So the family may be visiting 3 or 4 educators from your service. So it's really important that, they have something concrete to look back on, to be able to go, okay, I do remember what this educator offered. I remember how I felt when I went into his or her home. And I do remember, all of the things that I need to bring, because I have a beautiful booklet here that tells me that. Okay, it also allows us to build our business, and it's really important that we are a force to be reckoned with. We are competing with many other early childhood education and care services, and we need to stand tall and be really proud of the business that we have built and showcase this to families. This is our opportunity. It's our first impression, but it's our opportunity to be able to show families why they should put their child into our service. It is the start of a process of a word of mouth. So hopefully over time, depending on how long you've been an educator, but if you do leave a lasting impression and you come across as a professional educator, then the families are going to tell lots of their friends and family, and you will find that you will establish a little bit of a waiting list for yourself over time, and that you are representing the family daycare service as well when you step out into the community. So it's really important to ensure that this is front and centre of our minds as well. And just remember as well that people will recommend great educators to their friends. So that's why it's, great to put your best foot forward and look really professional. Okay, enrolment and orientation eases the transition period for us, but it also ultimately helps the child. And that's why we're doing this. So it's really important for children to have as many opportunities as possible prior to being left for long periods of time, where they've had a couple of hours to actually explore your service, to get to know the other children, to have a look at what the environment smells like, what can they explore, do you have a great outdoor environment. There are many different reasons that the transition period is really important, but mostly it's for the children, so that they start to build that trusting relationship with you. Now we're going to jump into what the frameworks, regs, and the national quality standards require. And it's important just to remind ourselves of this. So clearly the enrolment and orientation processes are important to everybody, but what do the regs and the national quality standards require of us in relation to enrolment and orientation? So yes, it's important to build trust, and yes, it's important to build those beautiful relationships, but there's a reason that we have to do this. So it's really important for us as educators to just remind ourselves of our obligations as well. So we're going to have a look at the learning frameworks. So children learn about themselves and construct their own identity within the context of their families and communities. This includes their relationships with people, places and things, and the actions and responses of others. Identity is not fixed. It is shaped by experiences. So when children have positive experiences, they develop an understanding of themselves as significant and respected, and feel a sense of belonging. And I'm sure many of you can agree that the being, belonging and becoming is something that family daycare educators pride themselves on. children are stepping and families are stepping into our home, we would like everybody to feel that sense of belonging. Relationships are the foundations for the construction of identity. So who am I? How do I belong? And what is my influence? So really powerful as an early childhood educator that we can actually guide many of these foundations for relationships. And in early childhood settings, children develop a sense of belonging. When they feel accepted, they develop attachments and they trust those that care for them. So, really powerful. So, I'm just going to read that again so that we can really reflect on this as an educator. In early childhood settings, children develop a sense of belonging when they feel accepted, develop attachments, and trust those that care for them. So, really powerful. The early years learning framework also tells us that when children feel safe, secure, and supported, they grow in confidence and they can explore and learn. So, again, I ask you to go back to a time when you've either put your own children into care or you remember a very special teacher or educator. How did that make you feel? Did you feel that sense of belonging? And what was it about that sense of belonging that was special to you? Because this will obviously be different to everybody. So whether it's a cultural experience, and then we can talk about cultural safety as well. When families step into your place, what does your space tell them about what they can expect from the care and education that you're going to provide to their children? So it's also that the early years learning framework is telling us about the importance of our relationship with the children and their relationships with others and each other. This is one of the reasons that those initial orientation visits or play visits are so important. And I would really encourage you to do that if you are able to. Now we're going to have a look at the national regulations, and the national regulations require that family daycare service are registered with and us as educators too. Regulation 160, number 2, you are required to keep an enrolment record with specific information on it. And we will break this down in the next couple of slides. And also, it's important to remember Regulation 1782, as a family daycare educator, you must take reasonable steps to ensure that the enrolment documents are accurate. So we will go through this in a little bit more depth in a minute, but I just want to remind you and make sure that you were aware that as an educator, you are responsible, not just the coordination unit or the service in general, but you must take reasonable steps as the educator to ensure that the enrolment documents are accurate and to ensure that you do have documents that are current and that you can locate them easily and that they are kept secure for confidentiality as well. And did you know that as a family daycare educator, you will receive an infringement notice and a fine of potentially up to $2,000 for breaching Regulation 178? So 178 said that as an educator, you do need to take reasonable steps to ensure that the enrolment documents are accurate. So it does say reasonable steps. So you have to be able to prove that you've done everything within your power and within the reality of what you do to ensure that the information that you have is current. And we'll break this down a little bit further, as I said. Okay, so this is just an example. It doesn't have to be exactly like this, but this is some of the information that must be included on the enrolment form. So as a service, how the service chooses to gather this information will vary from service to service, but I think it's important, as we've just said, it's your responsibility to ensure that the information's current, but it's really important for you to actually go through this and know what information you actually have to obtain. So first of all, we need to have the full name, date of birth, and address of the child. And we also need to have the address and contact details of each known parent or caregiver or guardian. I think it's important to highlight that as well. Any emergency contacts, and generally most services will ask for about 2 emergency contacts, but I would really remind the service to ensure that the emergency contacts are people that are close that can actually come and collect the child if need be. If you live in Sydney, we don't want to have an emergency contact for somebody, down in Kiama. We want to make sure that if the child needed to be collected quickly, that they are able to do so. Then we also need the authorised nominee. We also need the information of any person who is authorised to consent to medical treatment or administration of medication, and any person authorised to give permission to the educator to take the child off your premises if this is something that you do in your service. We need to have the details of any person authorised to give permission for the child to be taken outside the premises, so therefore on an excursion, or it could be a play session or something like that. And any person authorised to give permission for the child to be taken outside the premises on transport provided or arranged by the service. And it's really important to highlight this, because this is something that is probably going to change fairly soon in terms of transport. And, many of you have probably seen that some children have lost their life, from different instances, relating to transport. So very important for that last point. We also need to have the details of any court orders, parenting orders, or any parenting plans in place. And as an educator, you need to be across this as well. We need to have the information, the gender of the child. We need the language used within the child's home. And again, another really important conversation that you could have upon enrolment or orientation that actually respects the family's culture, and also, can help you with your programming and documenting as well, to include this as part of your program. We need to know the cultural background of the child and their parents. And importantly, we need to have any special considerations for the child, such as cultural, dietary, or religious requirements, or any additional needs. And some of this information you may be aware of prior to the child coming to meet with you. And that would be great if this is on your waiting list application as well. We also need to have authorisations for the approved provider, the nominated supervisor, and or the educator to be able to seek any medical treatment and or ambulance transportation for the child as well. And also the service to take the child on regular outings. And as I said before, regular transportation of the child is actually going to be something that is probably going to require a lot more attention fairly soon. Okay, so let's have a look at the information continued that must be included. So we also require the name, address, and telephone number of the child's registered medical practitioner or medical service. Really important, and probably something that I find that many families tend to leave out. So it's really important when you're going through the enrolment form to ensure that we have this information. We also need to obtain the Medicare number if available, the details of any specific healthcare needs of the child. So again, allergies, is there a diagnosis for anaphylaxis or something like that? Do they require an EpiPen, and so on? Any medical management plan, anaphylaxis medical management plan, or risk minimisation plan, really important to ensure that this is done in consultation between the educator and the family. We also need to know as educators what the dietary restrictions are, especially because we are family daycare and we are within our home. So therefore our kitchens or other rooms of the house could potentially hold some dangers for children with any allergies or things like that. We also need to know the immunisation status of the child, and I think that would be something that you could share with families as well, and families may actually ask you about the COVID vaccination as well. So that might be a conversation that you might unpack through enrolment and orientation. If the approved provider or the staff member has cited a child health record, a notation to that effect. So we need to have that in place. And in New South Wales, it's important to point out that certificates for immunisation or exemption for the child as required under the Public Health Act 2010 for New South Wales. So we do need to have immunisation certificates for children. In Victoria, it's important to point out that certificates for immunisation as required under the Public Health and Wellbeing Act 2008, Victoria, which includes outside school hours care or school holiday care services as well. And also if there is any regular transportation undertaken for the child, that the authorisation for this must be included with the enrolment forms and also part of their records. So lots of information. Okay, now we're going to just jump over and have a look at the national regulations and just remind ourselves again as educators what we need to do. So the regulations require family daycare service that we are registered with and us as educators to Regulation 169, ensure that policies and procedures are in place for managing enrolment and orientation. And this might be something that you can check as an educator when you're inducted into a new family daycare service. If you haven't seen any policies and procedures, then that is very much a concern, and that's a conversation that I would have fairly quickly. But as educators, you really need to have copies of these policies and procedures at your service so that you can show them to families as well. Or there may be another way that families are given access to the policies and procedures so that they're well aware that these things are in place. Regulation 170, number 2, we need to take reasonable steps to ensure that those policies and procedures are followed. And hopefully, when you have home visit support, your coordinator, ESO, whatever other names, child development officer, the person that comes to visit you would be able to actually go through these processes with you and ensure that you do understand that these policies and procedures are in place, but equally as important, are followed. Regulation 178, number 3, and Section 175 of the law make the enrolment documents available to the family or to the authorised officers of the regulatory body on request. So if you have a spot check and you do have an authorised officer ask to have a look at your enrolment forms for the children, it is okay to actually hand these over. The personal information, I'm sure many of you are concerned that it may be a breach of confidentiality, but as an authorised officer, they do actually have permission to be able to access that. Not that they would probably sit there and, recite all of the information, but they will have a look that the records that you keep for children are consistent and that every child in your service does have the required paperwork that they need. Now we're going to jump over to Quality Area 6 of the National Quality Standards, and this requires us to build collaborative relationships with families. And this is something that we said right at the beginning of the presentation, that this is going to be the foundation of a beautiful, long-lasting, hopefully, relationship with families. So element 6.1.1, families are supported from enrolment to be involved in the service and contribute to service decisions. So we did also talk about the importance of a handbooklet, and this is where you can put some of this information for families, just so that if they aren't taking this information in at your orientation service or meeting, then this is something that they can look back on. And hopefully you can continue these beautiful conversations to actually invite the families to be part of their child's learning, and most importantly, to be part of the service decisions that are made about their child. Element 6.1.2, the expertise, culture, values, and belief of families are respected, and families share in decision making about their child's learning and well-being. This one is really important, and again, something that can't be undervalued. And hopefully you're having many conversations with families about this, or whether you're sharing information through an electronic platform, whether you document that way, but always tapping into the expertise, culture, and values and beliefs of families and trying to respect those as much as possible. And I think a great way of doing that is through the enrolment process, so that you actually set up what the expectations are and parents understand what they can expect from you, but equally you can actually have that conversation with families and ask them, what do they expect from you as an educator to be able to care for their child? How will their families' values and culture and beliefs be respected throughout your service? Element 6.1.3, current information is available to families about the service and relevant community services and resources to support parenting and family wellbeing. So this might be something that the coordination unit or the service provider does on a regular basis. This might be in the form of a newsletter. There are lots of ways that this information can be shared with families. It could actually be not just through newsletters, but if you have information sessions at your service, if parents are invited to come to play session, then they might be able to receive lots of this information. So lots of things that we need to give families. Okay, your turn. So what we would normally do here is ask for you to let us know of any questions that you might have, but I think with the volume of educators that we have on here tonight, it's not really feasible that we can do that. But what I would like you to do is, based on the information that I've shared with you so far, is to just take a few moments just to have a think about how you actually implement the things that we've talked about. So how do you ensure the national quality standards are followed? How do you ensure that families are aware of their role and obligation as well? And also, as we said before, how do we make families feel when they're coming to your service for the very first time? So I think if you could do that, that would be fantastic. I will give you just a minute to have a think about that. Okay, we've got some questions coming through, so I will periodically check those. Hopefully you've had a chance to just have a quick think about that. We will be having some more reflection time as we go through the slides. So let's keep moving. Ways that we can do enrolments well. So firstly, we will talk about the enrolment process. How can we do the enrolments well? What we need to do is make sure that we get everything required at the one time. So as I said before about being organised, if you're racing around and trying to get things and you look busy and hectic, then families are probably going to think, well, maybe this isn't the service for me. But as much as you possibly can, we just want to have everything ready at the same time. So nothing can frustrate parents more than continually being told that they need more than one document to formalise an enrolment. So make sure that you give them a list clearly outlining everything that they need from the get-go so that they know what the expectations are. And this may be your responsibility or it may fall on the service. But again, follow your policies and procedures on this and just make sure that you look really super organised. Okay, we also want to be clear about our responsibilities within our service. So what is your role? What is the service's role? And what is the family's role? And it's okay to ask those reflective questions of families and say, could you please share with me, what do you expect from me? What do you expect from my service? How can I best support the needs of your family? Your services policies should make this very clear. Go back and read it and then reread it again. And um, if it's not to have a discussion with your coordinator, if you're unsure about this, and work out who should be doing what. And I would probably also add here that it's really important when you're talking about responsibilities that you also talk about the beautiful fluffy things as well, like your philosophy and the service philosophy, because these important documents actually underpin everything that we do moving forward within our service. And I think it's important to sort of unpack this with families and make sure that they understand what the expectations are and ask them what is their philosophy about how their child should be learning and be supported within your service. And then that way, I think it actually gives you a really clear understanding as if this family is actually going to be suitable to what you can offer them. Okay, so we want to follow the services policy. Again, we said this is really important. And this is where we would describe the process. So obviously, all policies and procedures for each service are going to be different. And you don't need to go through every single policy. But what you do need to do, your responsibility as an educator, is just to ensure that families understand that there are many policies that need to be followed. And from time to time, a family may ask for a specific policy depending on what the issue may be. Okay, so we're going to move away from enrolment and we're going to have a look at ways that we can do orientation well. So I'm just going to give you a little moment while I just jump in and have a look at some of the questions and see if we can answer them as we go along. Okay. Okay, so one of the questions that has come up is, do educators need to keep hard copies of enrolment forms, or can they have the saved enrolment document in their computer? A really good question, and thank you for sending that one in. The answer to that is no, you don't need to have a hard copy, but as long as you can access the information when needed. So if you keep it on your computer and you are unable to access your computer because there is a blackout or something like that, how do you actually store the important information on the enrolment form that you do need to be able to access? Recently, we had a spot check and this question was actually asked, and some educators were able to just show them on a laptop, and some educators chose to have both. You can have them stored on a laptop or computer, or you can have a hard copy as well. So hopefully that answers that. The next question is, my service provides digital access to policies and procedures through the service website. Is this okay, or should I request a hard copy from my service? Again, as long as you are able to access it and refer to it when you need to, then that's okay. Again, it just depends on technology and how it's going to work for you. But each service will do something different. Again, go back to what your service philosophy is. Some services are very sustainable and choose not to print them out, and that's okay. But we do need to be able to access these documents, particularly if there was a spot check or through assessment and rating as well. So hopefully that answers those questions for you, but please keep them coming. Okay, so ways that we can do orientation well. We really want to focus on the child initially. There would be nothing worse than ignoring the child and focusing just on the family. This is your opportunity to showcase to the family what your interaction is going to be like with their child and how special are you going to make the child feel. The parent will be looking for what kind of bond, how safe you make them feel, are you engaging with them? And I think this picture really resonates with this particular educator has dropped down to the child's level and really engaging with eye contact. And that's really important for families to see. So we do need to focus on the child, and yes, there is times that obviously we need to provide that information to families. So the parents and family are important, but the parent just wants to know that their child will always come first. So I think we would all agree with this. We need to remember that it's the child's and family's first orientation. So not only important for the child to feel safe and secure, but making sure that you provide lots of information for the families. They might have many questions, they may have no questions, but really try and engage with them and, gauge what sort of information they're looking for. So let's have a look at this picture. If I asked anyone what you could see and what you would probably say, it would probably be the obvious. So children's bags, a security gate, educator certificates, and a birthday chart. Standard stuff, I'm pretty sure that you would agree. Standard to you, but as an adult or a family member coming to your home for the very first time, they may not have ever seen anything like this before. So I think that even though you may have done hundreds of enrolment interviews or orientations, sometimes we can become a bit complacent in the process. But I think it's important that we treat every family as individuals, as we do with children, and really take the time and invest the time to be able to go through all of this information and say to them, this is where I keep my certificates. These are some of the professional development opportunities that I've engaged in. It might be as simple as your child protection certificate, and just ensuring that parents understand what the requirements are of you and where they can locate this. We all know that the child will settle after all, but the family doesn't. So we need to bring all of the energy that you brought to the first orientation that you ever did, or your meet and greet, to everybody that steps inside your education and care service. Okay, this slide actually says make as much fuss over the second child. So what we need to remember is that we want to make a fuss, or maybe not even use that terminology, but maybe just have a think about how we're making the child feel. So whether it's the first child, the second child, third or fourth child of that family, we want to treat everybody as equal and make sure that every family member feels the same. So even to a family, even to a family that we know very well, we don't want to assume that we understand the needs of every child that's in their family. So we want to make sure that everybody feels like they are an individual. Extend your hospitality. So even though there is a picture of a beautiful fruit basket, we're not saying that that's what you need to do, but what we do need to do is just make sure that you're hospitable. You are welcoming people to your home. So introduce them to your children, to your partner, to any other family members that you have living there if they are part of your service as well. You may want to offer them a drink as a minimum, and you also want to make sure that the families have somewhere to sit, somewhere comfortable, somewhere where it's quiet, where they can take a moment to reflect on all of the information that you've just given them, and make sure that your family daycare environment is as clean and tidy as it can be. But we also want to make sure as well that families get a really good view of what your service is like. So if it's too clean, there have been families in the past that have said, I actually don't know that my child would be allowed to play there, and therefore this space may not be suitable. So there really has to be a happy medium. And I would really recommend that you extend your hospitality for the family to come into the playroom to have a look at where their children will be sleeping and resting, where they will be playing outdoors, really showcase all of the parts of your home and education and care service. Then we want to have a think about what you would like if you were the family. So again, this is, going back to the conversation that we just had about putting yourself in the family's shoes. If you were coming, what things would you expect? What would you like to see displayed? How would you feel? And how can you encapsulate this into the orientation process? And again, respecting the needs of every family, and the makeup of every family is different. So again, this is where your booklet would come in really handy. Okay, your ideas. So we would normally go to the chat box here, but we're not going to with so many people on this session tonight. But again, this is just a moment to stop and reflect. So looking at the environment and, taking a moment to think about, if you were the family, what would you like to see if you were taking your child to an enrolment or orientation meeting? What sorts of things? You might want to jot some things down as we go along. And hopefully at the end, if we get time to go through more questions, you might be able to take some ideas there. I'm just going to grab a drink. Okay. Evaluating our processes. So as we do really well as early childhood educators, we think about critical reflection, and we want to really evaluate our processes. And hopefully tonight will be another way for you to really think about your environments, or as we said, even if you've done 100 enrolment interviews or orientation, hopefully you are making the family feel like it is your first, and that everybody is feeling important. So tonight's session really is about just critically reflecting, what do I need to focus on? Do I rush families? Do I take a moment to actually showcase all of the fantastic spaces and learning environments that I have here for the families? Do I have a booklet? What information do I give to families? And maybe even survey some of your existing families and say, what did you like when I first met you and we went through the enrolment and orientation process? I think really drawing on the experiences of your current families is a really good way of critical reflection as well. Okay, ask your focus group. So, about focus groups, those groups that are assembled to participate in a discussion about a product before it's launched, or to provide feedback on, say, a political campaign or television series, etc. As I just said, then I would really tap into the expertise of the families that you have currently in your service, because they know what's working. They obviously are staying with you for a reason. So I think having those regular conversations, maybe it's a survey monkey, maybe it's in a newsletter, giving families lots of opportunity to be able to reflect on what they love about your service, or asking them to be brutally honest and ask where you could improve. And also, as I said, existing families and also children. It's really important that we involve the voice of the child as well. So if they're able to participate in this, what did you like when you first came to my house? If they can remember that, or giving them some visuals, or asking them to draw a picture, it's really important to include the whole family as part of this process. Okay, so now we're actually going to watch a video. This video is going for approximately 30 minutes. We only have one video for tonight's session, and the video in this session for PD in your pocket is between Lisa Bryant and Kim Hartmann, who is the service manager of Lake Macquarie Family Day Care. So I hope you enjoy this video.
So I'm very pleased to have with us tonight Kim Hartmann. Kim's the manager of
Service manager of Macquarie Family Day Care.
Lake Macquarie Family Day Care. So tell us a bit about your background in family day care, Kim. How long have you been involved?
I became involved in family day care in 2004. I had a background in long day care as an early childhood teacher, which kind of morphed into directing. And then I went into inclusion support for some time. It was when I relocated from Sydney out to Dubbo that, I was fortunate enough to secure a position with Dubbo, what was then Dubbo City, Dubbo Family Day Care. And I had a really supportive team who inducted me to the world of family day care. And yeah, I've been in family day care ever since, always in local government based services, but still with that, community kind of based focus around.
And how long have you been with Lake Macquarie?
I started with Lake Macquarie in early 2019. So yeah, coming up to 4 years.
So a newbie.
Yeah, well, I am actually, especially when I have staff who have been around for about 30 years. So
how many educators do you have at the moment?
Currently we have about 50.
Right, good, small size, not too big, not too small.
Yeah.
Okay, so can you give me a bit of a rundown on your enrolment process? Like from the very first time when a family rings your service and says, oh, I'm interested in family day care for my child, what do you do then?
If they're a family who've not had experience with family daycare before, usually they'll obviously have questions about the requirements of educators. So we're able to run them through and reassure them around the qualifications that are required, the insurance coverages, our support role that we have, and our involvement in children's placement and things. We've designed our webpage for our service that has basically addresses a lot of those frequently asked questions. So it directs families to information about what family daycare is, as well as our service, provides them with links to be able to find out more about, registering for childcare subsidy and those types of things. But on our webpage, there's also information about all of our, procedures, service policies effectively, and items like that as well that, they can go in and have a look at. So, so that initial conversation obviously is about responding to any inquiries or queries that they have about the service and about how family daycare operates, and putting them in touch with resources and information that's going to support their, use of care as well. Then I suppose, what basically happens is if we're fortunately in a position where we're able to link them up with a vacancy that an educator may have, we provide them with the educator's contact details so that they can make that contact themselves to arrange for an initial meeting with the educator at a time and in a way that's convenient for them. Mostly that tends to sort of happen initially outside of operating hours, because obviously the educators are sole operators, and so it's really difficult for them to attend to a family's questions and and supporting a new child's time in a service while they're also attending to the other children. So so we put them in touch with the family. A lot of educators obviously do their own advertising and things, and so they're able to attract families. And a lot of our educators actually have established a very strong reputation within the community, and so they do have their own wait lists as well. So they're also able to reach out and connect with families when they do have a vacancy arise.
And when they do they then refer them on to you to go through the formal enrolment process? Or?
Yeah, once the educator and the family do agree on a placement offer, what happens then is that, either the educator or the family get in touch with our office, and we have an online enrolment process. So essentially they let us know that they've agreed upon a placement and request that we send them out a link so that they can complete that online enrolment. Again, there's information, there's a template email that goes out with that enrolment link that again sort of informs and preempts with the family the type of information that is required for them to be able to complete their enrolment, such as the mandatory, immunisation schedule, things like that. If there's any parenting orders or plans in place, any other sort of supporting documentation, medical healthcare plans and needs as well. So, so we try and arm the families with knowledge about what is going to be required to complete.
Yeah, given that so much is required to enrol these days,
and particularly, if it's their first venture into early education and care as well, which for family daycare it often is, because it being such a small, intimate, family-oriented environment, it quite often is a preference for families with very young children. So it may be their first experience of early education and care. So.
And explaining childcare subsidy to anyone is very challenging.
It is, but again, that's where, we have wonderful admin staff who are able to, really put it into lay terms for the parents, and they find that really supportive as well. Just knowing what questions to ask if they do need to contact Centrelink. Knowing the terminology and what phrases to use, what questions to ask, sort of just helps them navigate that process as well. So
sure. Yeah. And I understand that you're drawing up a checklist for educators of topics they have to go through. What precipitated that? Why are you doing that?
I think there's a lot of information, as you said, for families to be able to get their heads around and take in when they're using care, particularly for the first time. And I guess what we wanted to do was try and make sure that it gets broken down in a way that is logical according to the part of the process that they're involved with at the given time, but also as a bit of a prompt also to support educators, knowing, for them to have a bit of a map, I suppose, and a plan about knowing what things they want to ensure that they do discuss with families, what information they want to collect and learn about the child, what aspects of their service they want to be able to showcase and promote with the family as well. And I guess it helps establish those clear understandings and expectations about the service provision, and and orienting both the family and the educator to and establishing that relationship really that's going to be ongoing for the term of the child's placement with them. So And
what do families tell you about about that process that they've been through a meet and greet or a series of orientation visits with an educator? What kind of feedback do you get back from families about that?
It's interesting when we ask families what they value, what has supported their decision about their placement, and beyond the obvious of being, the days and the times and the location being convenient and suiting their needs, what they overwhelmingly tell us is that it's that first initial connection that they establish, when their child enters the environment and the educator interacts and engages with their child, and also the way the educator engages and communicates with the family about the child and their intentions and desires and wishes for care. That is the most valuable and important factor in them making the decision about their placement. So it's I don't think it can be underestimated, the power and the importance of establishing that interaction and that connection from the outset, because it really sets the tone for that ongoing relationship. And we always sort of say it's all about relationships. If you have that connection and that I don't know what to say. Yeah, if you have that connection from the outset, it sets the tone for how you're going to engage, exchange, and share information ongoing.
I know that I have an adult daughter with a disability, and I have to engage support workers for her. And some of them come in for their meet and greets, and they're very good at communicating with me, but they've forgotten to communicate with her at all. And it's like, that always sends off warning symbols to me. It's like, no, she's the one that you're going to be focused on.
Yeah, and when the families, they will say things like, my child just, walked in the door and went and sat down and immediately started playing, and it was like they were at home. type of thing. And so I think, yes, the environment is important, but it's not the physicality of the environment necessarily, or what bells and whistles might be there. It's about the sense and that feeling of environment,
that's kind of intangible and hard to do, but it's really important.
Well, it's about the genuine intention, I suppose, and regard of the educator.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Your service, I understand, uses Harmony software as part of the enrolment process. How does Harmony alert the educator to what is needed to finish the process, or what information's missing, or what they can find out about the family?
Well, again, hopefully through that meeting process and things, the educator and the family have had a lot of those conversations already. But once the family have submitted their enrolment to our office, we get an alert, and obviously we review that information to ensure that everything has been completed. The enrolment form is, again, obviously designed to collect all the information that's required by regulation. And so once that comes back, it populates and gets mapped out in Harmony to the child's individual record. And and in this particular program, there's tabs, across the top of the page where it alerts the educator to various aspects of the child information, whether it be general contact, whether it be, medical needs. But there's also the capacity within this program to upload the actual documents, PDF documents of the enrolment form, plus any supporting documentation, like I talked about with, medical condition or healthcare need plans, any parenting plans or orders, that type of information. But this program also on the educator's dashboard links, and if the family does indicate that there's any particular items of care to note about the child, it does actually flag and give alerts.
That's good.
Which is a nice little visual as well. So straight away the educator can see whether there's any restrictions around media consent, or if there is a particular health need for them to know.
Sure.
Health needs are treated a little bit differently, obviously, because we communicate with the educator prior to make sure that they have all the necessary information and or training, or and supporting documentation to support that placement as well, and for them to feel comfortable. But but basically the educator is able to access through their dashboard all the information that we hold about the child and the family, and supporting hard copy documentation, really.
That sounds great. As you know, I'm sure you experience sometimes there isn't a huge lead-in process with an enrolment. Someone will need care immediately and start more or less the next day. How do you manage all of that?
Quickly.
Hasty enrolment.
Quickly. The process, I suppose, still occurs in the same way, but I guess, it is fast-tracked in it that I suppose there's not as much time for the child and the family perhaps to spend orienting or doing a transition into the service. Quite often families and educators will like to try and have the parent perhaps come at least for one play date visit type of thing with the parent present prior to the child actually starting, so they do get to interact with the other children who might be attending on that day, or become a part of the routine and the rituals, that type of thing. Obviously if it's a fast-tracked type of enrolment, there's often that opportunity is restricted, but basically the process happens in the same way. At least the family and the educator need to have a conversation. It's rare that a family won't visit an actual educator's premises prior to starting, but that's the beauty of operating in that digital online world, is that we're able to email out a link to the family. They can complete the components of what's required online. They hit a submit button, it alerts directly back to us. We can look at the information, again, give a phone call or an email to confirm that we have everything that's required, and then the educator is CC'd into that sort of process, so they in real time can get a sense about where it's up to and when the family's ready to commence.
And generally with enrolments, do you get all the information the first time, or do you have to go back a few times to... Still waiting on that transport authorisation, or still?
They're the types of things. The online enrolment obtains all the essential regulatory required information. The form again is designed so that there's mandatory fields, so it doesn't allow the family to submit the enrolment until
they've
at
done
least
it.
that
That's good.
absolutely essential information has been supplied. It's not often that we do need to follow up, but again, a common occurrence is when families may duplicate their CRN, for example, and as the child's CRN. And it's just a little thing. So it'll allow them to submit the form, but then we just need to sort of say, oh, look, your child will have their own customer reference number with Centrelink. But it gives us the opportunity then to connect with the family and establish our relationship with them as well, because so much of it occurs between the educator and the parent. So no, it's not often that we don't have all the information we need, but all of those authorizations and consents and that type of documentation is something that is discussed and obtained between the educator and the parent. Because again, the educator needs to have those conversations to describe their practices around how those things are implemented, water activities consent, interaction between, pets and animals and the children, how they undertake excursions, if there's any transport involved in the care, those types of things, that's important for the educator and the family to discuss directly, because it happens differently for everyone.
Exactly. I was going to say you could have as million different processes for those things as you do educators.
So as I said before, our web page makes all of our forms available online, so the families and all the educators can access and download those at any given time, and we know that they're accessing the most current form then as well. So so that part of it occurs between the educator and the family directly.
I understand that your educators at Lake Macquarie manage their own orientation process, that that once you've referred a family over to an educator, they meet with the educator and then organise those play sessions or play dates or orientation sessions. What would you imagine, what would you like to see your educators doing in those sessions? What would you imagine would work well for families and children?
I think that's all the elements of what we're trying to capture in that mapped out sort of, I don't like the word checklist, because, it gives you a sense that you've got to sit there.
We've got enough of those.
We have enough of those. As I said, it's designed as a support tool, but I suppose it's what we'd like to see happen is that the educator and the family work together to determine what they both need from that process. And that as I said, there are some families who come to the service having used, multiple types of education and care in the past, or multiple services as well. So, they feel really confident and comfortable with the process and know what to look for and what questions to ask if they do have any queries, that type of thing. Whereas, and then on the flip side, you get those families who, are really apprehensive and anxious, and it's their first experience of, entrusting the care of their child to somebody else. And so what the orientation and transition process is going to look like, will be different for each individual family. And depending on the needs and support and care needs of the child too, it may be that there's more orientation and pre-placement visits are necessary to establish that understanding and knowledge about the child. It may be that there's other agencies involved in the care of the child as well, and it's really important perhaps for an educator to have opportunity to have conversations with them about their involvement and things. So I guess, ideal orientation is one that is determined between the educator and the family, and that is determined that it's what they want it to look like, I suppose. And that at the end of the day, everybody feels supported and prepared and ready for the placement to occur.
And have started that building of a really strong relationship.
But also, I guess, ideally too, we want to make sure that both the educator and the family have had opportunity to I guess cover all that necessary stuff, talk about some of the policy expectations and requirements, particularly around items that unfortunately may tend to become problematic at times. Things
Sick
around
days.
sick days, exclusion
Public
bundles,
holidays.
children, what to pack in lunch boxes, you know, expectations around what are appropriate foods to share. It's amazing sometimes how they have the capacity to cause that contention and I suppose just discomfort almost, you know, in interaction between educators and families and things. So it's really nice to get that stuff out in the open.
Yeah, put your cards on the table straight away.
Establish those understandings, and it can help alleviate some of those.
I always remember a line that says that anger is caused by unmet expectations. And if someone doesn't have an expectation that they'll be able to bring their child no matter how sick they are, then they're less likely to get angry when the educator says, no, I think you need to come and pick up your child because they're too sick to be here. Yeah,
or if they know that in the event that XYZ does occur, this is going to be the response, or this is the way that we manage it, or, you know, this is what happens type of thing.
Can I just read you a bit of the guide to the NQF? And I just want you to think and tell us about whether you think this is true. It says, when families are given the opportunity to provide information about their children, they feel that they are regarded as partners in their child's experience at the service. Do you think that's a true statement?
It's interesting to sit down and really think about that and break it down. But I mean, my initial response is absolutely.
Yeah.
If an educator is wanting to know about a child, then who better to seek that knowledge from than the parent, you know? And so it gives that sense that it sets up that recognition from the outset that the family knows their child best. You know, and I suppose it sets up that understanding as well that sorry, I'm not articulating myself very well here, but
you're doing fine. One of the things that I always think is that for some families, those that haven't been in multiple sorts of care before, this is the first time they're putting their parenting on show. And so if the educator is receptive to their parenting and treats them as the expert on their child, then that makes the family feel, I don't know, safer, you know, as if they've passed the test of, yes, they are a good parent. And I think that's something that's really important to think about, how families might be nervous about meeting an educator. After all, that person's called an educator, you know, they're no longer called, a child carer or anything like that.
Daycare mum.
There's something, you know, they're a professional and they want to, you know, appear like they've done a good job in front of that professional.
Yeah, I think now sort of talk through that a bit, Lisa. I think what comes to mind for me, I came across a phrase, and it wasn't all that long ago or whatever else, but I guess as you said, when families are given that opportunity to share and exchange information, as I said, it does set up that team between the two. And the phrase that I'm referring to that I came across that I just absolutely adore, and it's basically what we're doing is we're teaming around the child.
Oh, isn't that beautiful? That's a great concept.
Yeah, and I have stolen that from somebody who I'm sorry that I'm not acknowledging. I can't recall exactly where I found it, but I did. I just love that phrase, team around the child. And I think that's what sort of the intention of that phrase
process
is.
Okay, and I think that's a wonderful place to finish, because I think everyone should be able to think about teaming around the child. Thank you very much for joining us tonight.
You're welcome, Lisa. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's have a look at some of those things. So I've put up here questions, but what I would actually like to do would be to unpack and just reiterate some of the fantastic things that Kim Hartmann from Macquarie Family Day Care said. And I think probably the lasting impression that I think everybody will take away from that is teaming around the child. I've got it in capital letters here on my notes, but I think it's a really good way of framing what we've talked about tonight. And really packaging up how this looks for families and for children. So we are part of a team. We have us as educators, we have the family, we have the child, we have the service. We really are teaming around the child. So I want you to just have a moment to have a think about what that looks like for you as an educator, and what does that look like for you as part of your family daycare service that you're registered with. How does your service encourage you to team around the child? So that's a reflective question that I'd like you to take away from tonight. I was very fortunate to have met Kim and her fantastic team at Lake Macquarie, and I would just like to pay our respects to the Awabakal country that they were meeting on, and thank them for having us be part of that conversation. So what I took was that we play a role in supporting the families, and we also need to provide that reassurance to families when we first meet with them, because as Kim said, we are setting the tone for what it's going to be like for their child to come into your care. I also found it interesting as well that we didn't really touch on was how do we showcase to families that we are available? So do you have a web page? How can families find out more about your service? Where is the information about your policies and procedures stored? And how can families access this information? And equally as important, as I said before, about the service philosophy and also, profiles of the educators. Is that something that families are given that information prior to meeting with you so that they can make these educated decisions about who will care for their child? Interestingly enough as well, Kim touched on fees and charges, and this probably is something that many families will sort of come to you with questions about. And again, if you have all of this information very detailed in your booklet, and there may even be a service booklet as well, that's really important for families to have all of that information documented so that they can visit that at a later time. The other thing that I had there as well is explaining the terminology to families and trying to sort of limit the jargon that families may not understand what we're talking about. So when we talk about the NQF, what does the NQF stand for? So really unpack it for families and give them that information. And again, Kim was saying that they don't sort of look at it as a checklist for educators, but rather a map for educators. So again, whether you use a checklist, whether it's a roadmap, whether it's an information or service handbooklet, I think having all of that information at hand for families so that they can then unpack that a little bit later. And if they're meeting multiple services or multiple educators, they might get a bit confused about what the expectations are, because ultimately, as Kim was saying, when the family first meets you for the very first time, they're really looking at your interactions. They're looking at how you make them feel. They're looking at how you make their child feel. So all of this other information that we're talking about, which is very necessary and we must have, families may forget this information and forget the expectations. So I think it's really important to, allow families the time that they need to be able to explore your service. Some of the other things that I took away from that is also encouraging families to navigate the process with you. So is it the fees and charges that they're not sure about? Is it the policies and procedures? Do they understand the concept of the Early Years Learning Framework, National Quality Standards, National Quality Framework, regs, the law? How are you going to package this information and not overwhelm a family when they first come into care? Secondly, I thought it was interesting as well that conversations are taking place with families at the orientation or enrolment stages around authorisations and consents. I think this is really important as well, because this is where Kim was saying many of her educators are able to describe their routines. So what sorts of experiences can the parents expect their child to be engaging in? Is it water play? Is it referring to transport? Are there going to be excursions? I think, from a service perspective, we would have many calls daily where parents are saying, does the educator have pets? Do they have a swimming pool? Do they go out of the house? It's really important to make sure that you can answer all of these questions for families. And I think if, you had a folder, whether it's a compliance folder or a welcome folder, or as Kim described it, as a map for educators to showcase their service, I think it's important to have copies of these forms and consents and authorisations handy so that parents know exactly what they're signing off on. And some families may want to go home and chat to another family member about that, or chat to their partner, or chat to grandparents, or, other family members living in the home as well. So I think, while yes, we need to give families lots of this information at enrolment and orientation, what we don't want to do is overwhelm them. So I think it's a great idea, as Kim was saying, that, many of their educators will have several meetings with the families. And there's also some families where it's going to be a very quick enrolment process. So it might be just touching base as a service, or, as an educator. Do you follow up with a courtesy call to your families following the enrolment process? How are families feeling, maybe 4 to 6 weeks after their child starts in care? Was it what they expected? How much information do they still require? Have they had a chance to read through the information? Really important to sort of have a look at that aspect as well. Then some of the other information that I took down as well, I was madly writing, is that yes, we do want to provide that reassurance to families, and just making sure that they have ample time to be able to make these informed decisions about what is right for their child. And as we said at the beginning of this presentation, we really need to showcase and truly value that the family is the first educator of the child, and how are we actually going to provide that information and resources for the families to be able to feel like that they can contribute to their child's learning. That's really important. What else did I have? I think that's about it from what Kim said, and we would like to thank Kim and Lisa for their contribution. It was really informative from a service perspective about how they sort of induct families into their service, and I'm sure many of you probably have very similar processes. But I guess from tonight's session, as I said, I promised you a lot of reflective questions. And so during that session, I've actually written down some of my own reflective questions. When I present a session, I actually like the educator to come away feeling that the session was meaningful. Yes, we can all attend many webinars and training sessions, but to make it meaningful and take it to the next level, how are we actually going to put this into practice, and how from tonight's session is it going to inform your practice moving forward? So as I said, are you going to write tonight's session up as a critical reflection? Has it confirmed some of the processes that Kim spoke about and that I've spoken about and Lisa's spoken about? Has it confirmed that you are already putting many of these practices in place? Or if not, what were the practices that you feel that you probably could be a little bit better at, or areas that you could actually improve on? So some of the reflective questions that I would like you to take away from tonight's session are: how does the environment support children's learning and development? So when a family steps into your service for the very first time, how do they know what support their child's going to get in terms of learning and development? So that's one question. The second question is, how do we ensure as educators that the environment is organised to meet supervision requirements and also provide spaces for autonomy, privacy and a child's agency? And I think that's really important to really consider some of those factors as well. So that question again was, how do we ensure that the environment is organised to meet supervision requirements and also provide spaces for autonomy, privacy and a child's agency? And it would be really important to have these conversations with the families as well. Many families will come into your family daycare service and say, okay, that's great that you want to take 4 children out of your home. I struggle to take 1 child out. So how are you going to keep my child safe when you go on an excursion? How are you going to, if your philosophy is to explore risky or adventurous play, how are you going to showcase and reassure to families that their child is going to be safe? So it really is something to consider, and some of these concepts here are probably going a little bit deeper than what we've spoken about tonight, but I think it's really important that if we're going to make tonight's session meaningful moving forward and inform our practice, that we really stop and reflect. So you may send some of these questions out to your families. You may decide to do a survey following this session about what did families like and value when they first enrolled at your service. What was it that attracted them to your service, and how did they know that their child was going to be cared for in a way that was respectful, safe, accommodating, and valued the voice of the family as well. And one final reflective question is, how do parents know and contribute their ideas to your program and practice? So how do families know that what they have to say about their child is actually valued? How do you capture that information, and how do you document that as an educator, and I guess obtain that evidence that there is consultation with families and that you are building a strong trusting relationship with families? So really have a think about, how do parents know what their role is as part of their own child's learning? So that's it in terms of the reflective questions that I have. I'm just going to refer back to the main questions and just see, I'm just going to ask Ethan if there are any further questions on this session that need to be answered. I think we've covered most of them. Most of the questions are just around the digital access to policies and procedures. Do you have to have a printed copy? I think we've established no, you don't, but we really need to be very clear about where families can obtain this information. So it might be, shared in a newsletter. Hey, did you know that you can actually access our policies and procedures, blah, 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 or reminding parents about how they can contribute to their child's learning, and just reminding them, because over time you would probably enroll many families, and I think it's important that we just, show that it is a regular and embedded part of the process. So I believe that is all the questions for tonight. So I think I got away fairly easy with these questions, but generally around printing out the information. So no, I don't think there are any other further questions for tonight. So again, I'm just going to remind you of the reflective questions, and then we will finalise this session. So making tonight's session meaningful: how does the environment support children's learning and development and sense of agency? How do we ensure that the environment is organised to meet supervision requirements and also provide a sense of autonomy and privacy and agency for children? And thirdly, how do parents know and contribute their ideas to their child's learning? So hopefully those reflective questions give you something to think about and implement moving forward. I normally like to finish with a quote, but I'm actually going to go back to one of the quotes about belonging that I repeated twice, because I think it's really important to finish the session on this note. In early childhood settings, children develop a sense of belonging when they feel accepted, develop attachments, and trust those that care for them. So I really want you to, on that parting thought, just have a think about how in your service do we ensure that children develop a sense of belonging? How do they feel accepted? And how do the families feel accepted? And how are they going to develop strong attachments and trust yourself as the educator to be able to care for them? And what information do we share with families about their time within your service? So I would like to personally thank everybody for joining this session tonight. I hope you've taken something away from it. I hope I've given you some critical, reflective concepts to think about, and hopefully on the PD in your pocket page, you could share some of your ideas moving forward. Was it a survey to families? Was it photos of, how the children have engaged in, the orientation and enrolment process? And yeah, please feel free to share any questions on there as well. So thank you for joining tonight's session, and I hope you have a great night. Thank you.